Welcome to episode, I think it's 306 of Maple Syrup History and our third episode of the year of St. Augustine. Unlike the normal thing, although I am beginning this episode in our normal classroom, we have no live audience today. Sometimes we have 3 people, sometimes 25. Everyone is always welcome. Anyone on the Palouse, Moscow, Pullman, anywhere who finds themselves by the St. Augustine Center or even from far away. Do I expect some guy in the future to be like, I bought a ticket from South Carolina just to attend Maple Syrup History in person? I expect a lot of people to do that. So anyone is welcome to come for the live audience kind of presentation. Today is an exception because it's Labor Day. Everything is closed down. And today, everyone is only watching this on the channel, so to speak. So I wanted to take a couple moments to kind of go over some brief stuff. The first thing would be that this is the last of our introductory classes. After today, we begin diving into the work of the man himself, our patron, St. Augustine of Hippo. Before I even get to that, anyone kind of new to the channel, new to the thing, please note, why is it called Maple Syrup History? Because, I've said this many times to our live audience, anybody can have the pancakes of normal history, but to maple syrup, to lather on those extra facts and anecdotes of interest is what we aim to do in this production. Although this year is the year of St. Augustine, and I mean that fall 2024 into spring 2025, we have done many classes in the past. In my role as Director of Intellectual Formation, this is now my 11th semester and 6th year. You can go onto that tab on this channel, Maple Gracjan Syrup, that you're watching, and go to Maple Syrup History and see the previous stuff we've done. So if any of that interests you, Catholicism and disasters, on beauty, those are previous offerings, and all this stuff will always be posted here. I'd like you all to go now, if you don't mind, if you have your device kind of readily available, internet connection, go to vandalcatholic.com. As always, huge shout out, huge props to our department, the staff that puts together the website and all that kind of thing. If you go under Live Your Faith, click on Intellect, you'll see me right there, Dr. Gracjan Kraszewski, Director of Intellectual Formation. You can find out more about myself. My email is very simple to remember. It's intellect@vandalcatholic.com. If you have questions, whatever, write to me. But I'd like you to open up the course syllabus. And you can see, we started Monday, August 19th. That's episode 1. That's on this channel, on that playlist. So is episode 2. We've already done those. Intro to Class in Augustine, Intro to Augustine 2. And then Monday, September 2nd, which is this episode. I'm filming it actually before Labor Day, but it's the Labor Day episode. Is, like I said, Intro to Augustine Part 3. All this bio, last of the Intro to Augustine classes. Indeed, in this class, and I said this earlier, there's kind of stratification of first 3 classes, Intro to Augustine, and then we just read a bunch of Augustine. All fall into January and February 2025, March even. And then at that point, because the whole year of Augustine really means 2 semesters, years, academic years. Come April and May, we leave Augustine himself and talk about people influenced by him, or read, St. Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, unto modern thinkers like C.S. Lewis, Chesterton, whoever they may be. But if you've done what I told you to do, and you went to vandalcatholic.com, clicked on Live Your Faith, Intellect, and the course syllabus, that's what I'm reading from right now. Look what we have coming up. Guys, super exciting, right? The next 3 classes, Confessions. The next 3 classes, Confessions, X, by that I mean just the start of the book, start to page 89, then 90 to 220, and then 221 to the end, which is page 305. After we do 3 classes on Confessions, we do his other most famous book. I don't know, I've said many times, my PhD is in American history. I'm a novelist. I'm not a St. Augustine scholar expert. I am not an expert on the patristic fathers, etc., etc. Augustine is so famous, perhaps the most famous church father, that everybody has heard of his Confessions and his City of God, and there's a kind of going back and forth, probably depending upon personal tastes, both in an academic, professional sense, and kind of just personal taste, for its own sake, period, depending on which one you like more. Why do I have 3 classes on Confessions and 5 on City of God? The answer is mathematical. City of God is just much longer. You see the end of the book, 545 pages, whereas Confessions ends 305. That's it. It's not a pick on my part that I think City of God is 60% more important. 5 classes versus 3, almost double as important. It's nothing to do with that. It's just that it's longer. But we're going to read those. We're going to start after finishing this introduction, which that's today. Today is the last day of the introduction. We're going to read his Confessions, 3 classes, which is his personal biography, personal spiritual autobiography, his faith journey, his testimony. How did he move from not being a Christian to one of the greatest church figures in history, right? I mean, certainly he died in the year 430, and we're still talking about him now, 1,600 years later. After we finish Confessions, we'll read his great kind of like political tract, his great historical piece. The idea being, obviously, and a lot of you already know this, right? That as Christians, whatever is going around in our society, going on around us, we should always have our sights set on eternity, on the city of God, more than the fallen city of man. And Augustine writes this in the year AD 410, when things are getting really, really bad for Rome. The so-called barbarians are sacking the city, and Rome itself will fall in the west, only 66 years after that, 476, despite continuing on to 1453 in Byzantium in the east. The end is nigh for the Roman Empire in the west. And so Augustine is writing these kind of like, if not apocalyptic, kind of pre-apocalyptic, oh man, is this the end times? I mean, with right reason, Christ says, only the Father knows the end of the world. Every successive generation thinks, is this it? Is this the end of everything? And certainly you could imagine that with the fall of Rome in that even 100-year period, right, leading up to 476, that you might be, in that camp. After we finish City of God, we will go to On the Trinity, then On the Good of Marriage, On Holy Virginity, and the rest kind of is self-explanatory. I still have not made the syllabus for the spring. I think that's for obvious normal reasons, because normally my classes are a whole class in the fall, a whole class in the spring. The classes I mentioned earlier on the Maple Syrup History playlist was indeed that. Last spring, this year 2024, we did On Beauty, and the fall class was Catholicism and Disasters. Totally different classes. So although this is one cohesive year of Augustine, I won't have the readings for the spring available until over Christmas break at some time. Maybe I'll already have them made and kind of sent out earlier. All right, and finally, you see the books and the links are there. The Confessions version I suggest is the Chadwick Oxford University Press, whereas the 1958 forward by Etienne Gilson double-day image of City of God. Does it really matter if you get these exact versions? No. I mean, it matters if you want to be perfectly on point with the page numbers. But if you're just reading Confessions, and reading Confessions basically on thirds, 3 classes, and City of God on fifths, mathematically, spaced out, so to speak, you'll be fine, right? No problem. So anyone is always welcome to join us. And so without further ado, let us get to Augustine, Part 3, Introduction. All right, everyone. Next week, we'll be reading from Confessions. And like I said earlier in the first part of this video, this is the last part of the introduction to St. Augustine. If you look back over the channel, our first 2 episodes are about an hour long each, a little bit longer than an hour, hour 8 minutes, hour 10 minutes. I don't imagine this one going longer than 25, 30 minutes or so. In sum, we'll have close to 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours of intro on St. Augustine. I especially recommend watching that second episode, the one immediately prior to here. And then when you do, once we dive into Confessions all the way through, as I said, through City of God and all the stuff into 2025, you should have a pretty fair grounding of who the man was, what he stood for, his kind of personal story, all that. Okay, so as I mentioned before, Augustine has really, really strong rhetorical and oratorical prowess. For a large part of his life, especially before his conversion, he thought that a fault in rhetoric, a fault in speech, was something worse than a sin, even, right? Of course, all this changes after his conversion. But he arrives in Milan, as we said. Remember, he got kind of stiffed by his students in Africa who had taken this course, and the expectation was that at the end of the semester they're going to pay, and they did not.
And he's like, well, I want to get out of town anyways. So he arrives in Milan and visits Ambrose, or as the world knows him now, Saint Ambrose, this incredible holy man, in addition to his high level of intellectual ability. In fact, Augustine is drawn to go visit him in the first place, not because of religion at all, but simply because of his reputation as an orator. Ambrose is a master of rhetoric and kind of takes Augustine under his wing. And Augustine will say this about him, quote, I began to love him, of course, not as first as a teacher of the truth, for I had entirely despaired of finding that in thy church, but as a friendly man. So we're going to start our first Spirit in Life, Father Chase and I, on September 4th. And we're going to be talking about evangelical approaches, just evangelism in general, spreading the faith, kind of evangelization, as the new evangelization, as John Paul II coined, and now well into the first quarter of the 21st century. How about that? Like just that basic kind of like friendliness, approachability, the age-old grandmother adage that you win more friends with, you attract more flies with honey than vinegar, right? You win more friends by being kind and nice than being stern or radically honest, or I'm gonna say what's right all the time. I would say to that, not getting off on a tangent and a rabbit hole, we should be extremely, extremely hard with ourselves and hold ourselves to a very, very high standard and be merciless towards ourselves in a certain sense. Like, no, I need to do the right thing. I know it's right, sure. But towards others, like gentleness, compassion goes a long, long way. And that remembrance that all of us, have fallen short, right? So Ambrose is kind of taking two things, really draw Augustine into the orbit of the church. And it's definitely that Ambrose has the simple interpersonal friendliness that is very important. And he also wins Augustine's respect through his own intellectual abilities, and especially in rhetoric. He'll further on continue to say, Augustine does, in the book that we're going to read first, his spiritual autobiography, Confessions, that, quote, that man of God received me as a father would, and welcomed my coming as a good bishop should. I'm going to read that quote again. It's very, very good. That man of God received me as a father would, and welcomed my coming as a good bishop should. And even after, remember, we talked about Augustine's father, Patrick, in the last episode. He made a good end. Thank God. God rest his soul. That before he died, he converted to Christianity when Augustine was 16 years old. Ambrose even goes so far as to kind of adopt Augustine spiritually. He's his spiritual son, and really brings him into the full, the full orbit of his Catholic world in Milan. And this one snowball going down the hill will avalanche into this whole great church father that we know. It's good food for thought to think, who do I encounter? Who does God put in my path to make some kind of impact upon? Perhaps the full impact, the full measure of that I won't even be aware of, right? It's kind of comes down the road. Augustine's mother follows him to Milan. Augustine's mother goes to Ambrose. This is a cool anecdote. And tells him basically, like, you need to get my son to convert. You have to get my son to go to church. You got to tell him what's right. You got to get on his case. And Ambrose is like, no. And this strikes us as weird, right? Like, how many people today who have wayward children or a brother or a sister away from the faith or whatever it may be think I got to tell them. They got to shape up. I got to get in their face, their business, and let them know what's right and wrong. How often does that have the exact opposite effect? And we know what St. Monica is famous for, just endless, ceaseless prayer on behalf of her son, right? Begging God through bitter tears that God would give her son the grace to have what happens happen, right? That his heart would be moved and he would convert. That's all Ambrose counsels her at that time. He's like, I'm not going to go tell Augustine that. I'm not going to get in his face. I'm not going to say, you got to get in church. Let's go end this nonsense. You got to convert now. Perhaps sensing with some degree of prudence and wisdom, he is on the right path. He's getting closer and closer on this path, all in God's good time. Calm down. And really, I am all for speaking the plain truth. Matthew 10:32-33. Whoever acknowledges me before Christ, I will acknowledge. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge for the Father. Whoever denies me before others, I will deny before the the Father, Christ says, right? Like, are you a Christian? You're called to always say yes, and give a reason for our hope. It says later in the Bible, always be ever ready to explain the reason for your hope. I'm all for that. I'm all for saying, like, I am a Christian, my faith is the most important thing in my life, etc., etc. But there is some level of prudence and some level of being judicious, reserved, and kind of surveying the ground sometimes. And how often do we just like dive right in? Well, no, that guy's not doing the right thing. I'm going to go like yell at him. I'm going to go like curse him out, tell him he's bad, he's going to hell, that kind of thing. That guy, like, okay, he's just done, right? Thanks, man. Actually, you didn't even know before you came and cursed me out, I was on the right path. I actually was receptive to this faith thing. Oh, but you're one of these guys who's just like, yelling. Like, we have a lot of those people that are perhaps like overzealous in a certain sense. And I'm already giving out way too much unsolicited advice. I'm an idiot. Like, don't listen to my advice. But I would say, just as I said earlier, that we should be kind of very, very harsh with ourselves, but more compassionate with others. I would say the same thing with like zealousness about the faith. We should be insanely zealous with ourselves. Like Padre Pio once in one day prayed 105 rosaries. Do that. Like, beat his record. Pray without ceasing. Do 10 hours of Eucharistic adoration day. Look to yourself first, right? Remove the wooden beam from your own eye before you see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye. And I think there's a lot of wisdom here. Ambrose acting that way, I think. That he sees Augustine, this bright young man who has a good heart perhaps, but he's still far from God. Grant me chastity, just not yet, Lord. And he doesn't listen to his mom. And Monica's a great mother. God bless her. St. Monica, pray for us. But he's like, no, you need to calm down. Like, I'm not going to go tell him, like, get your butt in church right now, all this kind of stuff that might put him off the correct path. All in God's good time. Okay, well, when he moves to Milan, Augustine famously dismisses his mistress, right? And he writes this, quote, "My mistress being torn from my side as an impediment to my marriage, my heart which clave to her was racked and wounded and bleeding." Augustine loves this woman with whom he had a son. His mom, as I said in the previous episode, eventually arranges for him to be married to someone else, like a woman of better social standing. That doesn't work out either. To everyone's benefit, the church's benefit, he's going to become a bishop, right? And he won't marry at all. But again, it's in this period that he utters that famous quote that is, I think it is secondary. Certainly, our hearts are restless, they rest in you, is number one. But grant me chastity, just not yet, is the prayer of every person who's fallen short in this domain, right? Augustine and how many millions of other people who are like, I know this is bad, I don't want to be doing X, Y, or Z, but I actually do like this right now, so eventually, God, eventually, just wait, just not yet. don't have that conversion moment happen. I want to still do this stuff. That's St. Augustine 101, right? His conversion is very, very famous, and certainly something that's like a bolt of lightning of grace. And that phrase makes no sense, but I think you know what I'm getting at. Kind of just out of the blue, and just obviously something directly from God, right? At this point, Augustine already 386. He's in his early 30s. He's been very, very influenced by the Desert Fathers. Remember the previous episode, Anthony of Egypt and these guys, and he's like, we smart people, we masters of Latin, for whom an error in speech is worse than these sins Christians talk about. These simple people are just going out in the desert praying without ceasing. They're storming heaven. They're going right to heaven. And look at us, sitting around having kind of philosophical debates and to what end. About his conversion story, he says he's kind of just like sitting in the garden, right? And he hears his voice. Tolle lege. Take up and read. So he opens up a book, and it falls. Again, this is like, God's providential hand. Falls on Romans 13, chapter 13, verses 13 through 14, quote, "Not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof." End quote. That is kind of where, at that point, it's like, okay, grant me chastity, just not yet. Now it's been granted. This is the turning point. So then this conversion happens, and a whole new man is born, in a certain sense. And he writes this. I love that we're reading different quotes. And we did so many quotes last. I cannot recommend that enough. Go watch the previous Maple Syrup History episode, Augustine number 2, because that one is I think the most thorough, the most quote heavy, even compared to the first, the real opening of the class, which included some syllabus review and all that. But I'm really glad we're reading specifically from Confession some of these quotes, because that's the book that we're starting next week, right? So maybe it can be kind of like a trailer, an encouragement to come to that class. Remember, you're always most welcome. Just because 400,000 people watch online doesn't mean you can't come in person. Here's what Augustine says from Confessions about his conversion. Belatedly I loved thee, O beauty so ancient and so new, belatedly I loved thee. For see, thou wast within and I was without, and I sought thee out there. Unlovely I rushed heedlessly among the lovely things thou hast made. Thou was with me, but I was not with thee. These things kept me far from thee, even though they were not at all unless they were in thee. Thou did call and cry aloud, and did force upon my deafness. Thou did gleam and shine, and did chase away my blindness. Thou did breathe fragrant odors, and I drew in my breath, and now I pant for thee. I tasted, and now I hunger and thirst. Thou did touch me, and I burned for thy peace. Yeah, so I'd say like, kind of like, I always mix up St. Catherine of Siena and St. Teresa of Avila. It's two incredible women in church history. But I think both of them really talk a lot about the mystical experience of God. So too St. John of the Cross. Burning on fire, this kind of like mystical union with Christ. He's certainly, feeling this, right? Ambrose, our guy, who told St. Monica, no, I'm not going to tell him. No, I'm not going to tell him to come to this. No, I'm not going to tell him to come to youth group. No. Ambrose baptized Augustine, and his son, Aeodatus, in Milan on the Easter Vigil, April 387 AD. How appropriate. He's born in 354, dies in 430 at the age of 33. The year of our Lord's death and resurrection. 33, a very important year, right? Early 30s, kind of prime of life in many ways. A year later, Augustine, what a legend. A year later, completes his Apologia on the holiness of the Catholic Church. This guy's not even a Christian for a year, and he's writing books about Catholic doctrine. He's the man. And remember, I said in the earlier introductions, he writes like over 100 some tracts and books and essays and polemics and speeches and homilies. He is extremely prodigious with the pen. G.K. Chesterton, I would say, is one of the people. Chesterton himself wrote hundreds, if not thousands, of things, including from his time as a journalist. Just things literally from Chesterton's pen. I think number close to 1,000. Yeah, some of these writers just are very, very prolific, right? They have a lot to say, but more importantly, they know how to say it. They know how to perhaps manage their time, and they know how to find focus and argument to not have productivity mean an overabundance of quantity at the expense of quality. I dare say you could read anything by Augustine and be treated to very high quality theological discourse and otherwise. Because again, right, he was a master of Latin. You don't think that was part of God's plan? Even when he was away from the church, his Manichaean times, the fact that he held rhetoric and oratory in so high accord, so high regard. Of course, God uses all things for his glory. That's why too, I think it's like St. Paul talks about this, one body, many parts, everyone has different skills. I think St. Paul writes to St. Timothy, right? Not all of you should be teachers, definitely not, or preachers or whatever, but maybe you're good at this, maybe you're good at baking, maybe you're good at playing soccer. Like, everyone has different talents and abilities. Certainly Augustine's oratorical ability, his writing ability, even before he's a Christian, will transfer beautifully well to when he picks up the pen in defense of the church. Augustine will go back to Africa, sell a lot of his inheritance, his patrimony, his belongings, give it to the poor. Maybe not as drastically as Antony of Egypt, Augustine's hero, who, upon hearing, I think from Matthew chapter 19, 19 verse 21, verse 16 through 21, it's that principles of perfection. The rich young man, what should I do? Keep the commandments, right? Sell all you have and give to the poor, and then come follow me. That second one, sell all you have, give to the poor. Antony hears that and sells everything and goes off to the desert. Augustine, in a similar sense, he's ordained a priest in the year 391. According to some of the research that I did, this is insane. It says, although we only have about 500 of his sermons, some people say he preached as many as 10,000. He preached as many as 10,000 10,000 sermons over the course of his lifetime. The thing too is that this is not like the 7-minute homily, right? Which a lot of parishioners very much appreciate, right? You know, a priest can be a man of the deepest oratorical ability and skill if he can reduce a beautiful message tightly packed into 7 to 10 minutes, right? That's an art form in itself. But it's also an art form to keep the audience engaged and to have enough to say to speak for an hour uninterrupted, right? So a lot of these are over hours long, multiple stenographers writing down what he's saying, 10,000 sermons. And he would use a lot of different kind of rhetorical tricks. Tricks is maybe the wrong word, but kind of like things that he learned from his profession. And we see this all the time. Like Father Mike Schmitz, who's very, very popular, who probably does not need any introduction. The Bible in a Year, right? He does that. He does the Ascension Press videos. Maybe a lot of people know this, I don't know, but he was like a runner-up for some role. I think it was like runner-up to be Robin or something, or even like Batman himself when he was an actor before he became a priest, something like that. Maybe I'm messing that up, but something in that area. But yeah, he's very kind of like photogenic and good on camera and comfortable on camera. That's a gift from God, I would say. That's not like, oh, whatever. You know, Augustine, I said last class, has some kind of point that if you can't speak, that's bad. Like, then you shouldn't be presenting stuff if you can't do it, right? If you're too nervous or you just don't know how to speak, don't know how to deliver a speech. Father Mike Schmitz's ability as an actor before he becomes a priest helps that. I've mentioned in the past, Father Chase Hilgenbrink, who's a professional soccer player. That's certainly part of his testimony. Wow, this guy was the pinnacle of professional sports in the world, gave it up to become a priest. He's certainly going to use those skills as an athlete in his delivery of homilies, in his testimony retreats. Our own wonderful priest, Father Chase Hasenraw, an Oxford man. That's enormously important. It's very Augustinian, right? This incredible, highest possible level, the major leagues of education, and then to use that in his own work. So it's like that Augustine, don't discount that. We just hear about Augustine, he struggled with sexual sin, and then he converted, and he became a bishop, church. We don't think often I think we kind of take for granted his oratorical and rhetorical and writing ability, how much that helps him on later on. Okay. What are some of these rhetorical tricks? Analogies, similes, metaphors, repetition, antithesis. Antithesis is hilarious, working backwards, like a deconstructed speech against that which you want to say to arrive where you want to go, kind of Socratic in some way. Augustine says, though, guys, FYI, the preacher's ultimate goal is to ensure the salvation of their audience. Not to say, like some of our megachurch friends, that you can have 9 cars, or you can be as rich as you want, or you got to be happy. It's all about happiness, man. I'm so de-stressed. It's about feeling good. Like, the ultimate goal of preachers is to ensure the salvation of their audience. 395, 4 years after he's made a priest, he's coadjutor bishop of Hippo, and soon will become the full bishop with no qualification, 396. Hence his name, Augustine of Hippo. He writes the autobiographical confessions before City of God, confessions which we read first. If it was opposite, I'd still read confessions first. It's his personal, hello, my name is Augustine story. It's his introduction to him, so I would read that first, even if it was later. But it just so happens chronologically, he writes confessions first in 397, and then writes City of God in 410. Trying to think what else to add to you before we transition to the kind of final point, final kind of things about him. I guess I would say that, a lot of the stuff that he wrote, a final point on his bishop role, his role as kind of a teacher of the faith. I hate to use the word influencer, but as an influencer at that time, I think Augustine had this beautiful long-term vision of history. A lot of people say he's one of the first people to invent the concept of time. I'm not even kidding. A lot of civilization societies had a cyclical view of time, like the seasons, right? I mean, that makes sense. There's winter, spring, summer, fall, and then winter again. So maybe time is just like this circle where everything comes back around and whatever. Augustine is the first guy to kind of really talk about like teleology in God's providence, right? Moving through time towards, where this is going, right? Towards the heavenly city of God. Eventually, that's the whole goal. We're moving towards eternity. So as we work through this life, keep that in mind. And so I would say in his writings, he had a knowledge of that, I think, even as he was alive, about writing for future generations. Did he foresee us talking about him in Moscow, Idaho, 1,600 years later? I have no idea, right? Maybe he did. Maybe he's like, yeah, people will read me for time immemorial, to the end of time. I don't know. I have no idea. But he certainly was not one of these people that was a flash in the pan, just living for the now. Carpe diem, man. I'm just doing it from, or the kind of the false humility, right? People who don't want to strive for large goals. Well, I'm just trying to focus on my little simple thing. It's like, you're not being humble. You're just actually, you're like the guy in Matthew 25 burying his talent. You were demanding, Master, Lord, I was scared, so I buried it, kind of thing. Augustine was not like that. Augustine is the guy with 5 talents, makes 5 more. His personal traits, too, are described as someone who ate sparingly, worked tirelessly, after his conversion, gets away from the temptations of the flesh, thank God, by the grace of God, was a good financial steward. This is certainly important for a bishop. And above all, what I'm most excited about, avoided gossip. Very, very cool. Avoided gossip is bad. Gossip is a sin. He didn't do that. All right, so in conclusion, some final things. I'd highly recommend, I think I said this in the first episode, definitely in the last episode, Henry Chadwick, the guy who does the translation of Confessions, wrote a wonderful biography. Huge shout out to Father Chase Hasenrall, who gave me this biography over the summer when he and I were planning the contours, the rudiments of this idea for this year of Augustine. Chadwick Books is awesome. Chapter 9 of that book on the Holy Trinity, Chapter 10, 2 cities, notes on the city of God that'll prep us well for that book. Freedom and Grace, on sex, hell, lusts, and he has this beautiful kind of closing reflection on Augustine and the Holy Trinity at the end of his book. It's a thin volume, not even 200 pages. Chadwick, Augustine of Hippo biography, a life. So I would read that if you're like, look, I'm so on board. Like, I love maple syrup history. It's my favorite thing of all time. It's the greatest show ever done. And I'm really doing my due diligence as an audience member to prepare well. The best thing you can do, again, is go back and kind of review the introductory points and get ready to read the stuff that we'll read according to the syllabus. Once more, vandalcatholic.com. But also read the Chadwick book. I've said it a million times. I hope, God willing, God help me, that at the end of this year of Augustine, I'll be kind of an expert on Augustine. I sure hope so. I hope after a year of like reading, not hundreds, but scores, multiple sets of 20, 40, 50 things by Augustine, diving headlong, that I'll know a lot about him. That would be awesome. But I'm not an expert to the level of someone like Henry Chadwick. Not even close. My favorite passage in the Bible is St. John the Baptist about Christ. I am unworthy to loose the thongs of his sandals, right? John the Baptist, he's nothing compared to the Messiah. I'm nothing compared to someone like Henry Chadwick. Go read him, go read some of these good biographies, get really pumped and ready to read the man himself. Because starting next week, we're just full steam Augustine. Augustine, other kind of points. We are actors in a story we cannot see the whole of. Yeah, we live on the precipice of time, guys. Labor Day, right? Right now. Well, is there going to be an October 2024? I think so. I think probably. Could the world end before then? It could. Only the Father knows the time, Christ has said, but it definitely could. I don't know. Everyone who's ever lived has lived when the moment is now. The funny example I always give is I'm going to hit this desk in a moment, and when I hit this desk, it'll no longer be accessible. It's about to happen. I'm going to hit the desk. Once I hit the desk, it's going to be in the past, as close to us as Julius Caesar is, meaning gone. Gone, goodbye. Ready? There. Gone. That's gone. That moment is gone. It was on the precipice of time. The present is ever receding back into the past. Now it's gone. So Augustine says, yeah, like when we're living this, we can't see the whole picture, but God can. That's the whole point of God's providence, right? Augustine talks about monks as Catholic shock troops, which is very cool, kind of like Catholic superheroes, Catholic special forces. His rule, actually, the Augustinian rule is 100 years, more than 100 years prior to St. Benedict's great rule at Nursia, right, Monte Cassino. And Augustine, of course, like Benedict, very, very influenced by, talk about a Catholic shock troop legend, superhero, St. Anthony of Egypt. We've mentioned him many, many times, Desert Fathers. And there's a lot in the Chadwick book, too, about the culture of Christianity in North Africa, especially against the Donatist heresy. The central theme of Confessions, what is it? Man's alienation from himself. That man wants to play God only shows his creatureness all the more. The fact that I want to be in control, but I can't because I live in time, shows what a clown I am, and how I must turn to God, humble myself. Lord, have mercy upon me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I can't do it. And it's only that realization that helps us, move past our own selfish myopia and all that kind of thing. Augustine, we become what we love. Yeah, right? If you're like, I love golf, you golf every single day, I bet you become a better golfer, and all the way down the line, everything. I've never baked in my life. You might be saying, I bet if you bake every single day, you get better at it. You become what you love. So all the more so we should dedicate ourselves to the higher things, the things of God, prayer, etc. What's more, Christians and Donatists, one of this early heresy. Donatists are like early Protestants, and I'm not trying to bash anybody here. Although I have an endless bandwidth for humor of Catholics and Protestants bashing each other. But the Donatist guys are like, yeah, we're the true church. Well, so what? That we're not, the universal church. No, just us right here. We see this all the time in different Protestant denominations. Like, yeah, this one guy, okay, dude, okay. This one guy in the desert somewhere in Arizona, he's the true church, right? The universality is the whole mark of the church that Christ founded. The fact that it's not related to just one ethnocentric group or whatever. The Donatists, their big thing too is once you screw up, you never can be forgiven. Kind of, if you deny Christ, there's no repentance for you, and the sacraments depend upon the holiness of the priest. And the church rejects this right from the beginning, right? Thank God for good priests, but the sacraments, the efficacy, that's in God's hands, who is perfect and impassible. It doesn't depend upon the moral quality of the priest, so to speak. And again, thank God for priests, and I know many who are saints, who are amazing men, but it doesn't matter good or bad. And the Donatists are like, no, too much kind of focus. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We're going to talk a lot about the Donatists when it comes to some of his later writings. So I'll say that for later. But again, if you want to notice where this is in the book, the Chadwick book, if you're going to get that, and I highly recommend it, page 98 through about 120, back into the book. Life is only a holiday to those who opt out of it. Yeah, right? The Blessed Mother, in one of her apparitions, I think at Fatima, tells the children, I do not promise you happiness in this life. This life, in many ways, is the cross, right? And the wheat and the tares, and until the end of time, and God makes his rain fall upon the just and the unjust alike. Get to work, right? Make the most of your 5 talents or 2 talents or half a talent, whatever you have, make the most of it. And Augustine's like, yeah, if you just want to, I'm just going to chillax, man. I'm just going to hang out. I'm just going to design this app at age 25, make billions, and chill on a beach and make money off interest. No, that's awful. That's epic fail, he would say. Life is only a holiday to those who quit, kind of opt out, quit the fight that you're supposed to be fighting. Last point I want to make, I think, about him. Yeah, this is awesome. Eternity is not an extension of time. It's the absence of time. Guys, right? This is amazing. It's my mind, the first time I heard this, yeah, this is right. We think about eternity as a gabillion years, a gabillion million, gazillion years, just infinite zeros, whatever. And that it would be so long, right? No, eternity is the absence of time. It is the eternal now. It is not the slipping away as we just did. Once I hit this table, it's gone. It's the eternal state of something, and we got to pray by God's grace that we can have that eternal beatitude, be in that eternal, because we're going to be in a state of changelessness, regardless, for better or for worse, and may God grant us the grace to have it be for better. And so no better way to close than on that thought. And St. Augustine, pray for us. Looking forward to the next time I see you all in class. Take care.